Good morning. This is second Sunday of the month, September. And what is the date, Jay? 13th?
So 14.
14th. Yeah. Yesterday was my sister's birthday, my older sister's birthday. ASZC. This morning we are doing our Zen VIP, very interesting person. The subject or victim here is Taizan John Liles. So we'll have him tell us some of his story. And toward the end, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So, welcome, Taizan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that formal introduction for you. Do you have a website as such?
I do now.
You're still well known. John has been with us. When did you start practicing with us?
I believe that my first visit to Zen Center was in '85, when you were still in Canyon Park.
Okay, so think about it a little bit. We're going to do your picket fence story and a little bit about your family, your origins, and we'll move into more perhaps salient aspects. Announcements, I want to pass this around. Anybody wants a pocket schedule? There are a couple of those left, and that's for this month. Next week, as you know, probably know, I will be on a retreat in the mountains of the watershed. And on the 26th of this month, we have a Shakuhachi flute player coming in, and we will be offering the art for sale, and we have the numbers up and the price list and so on. The purchase of any art from this show, my pastels from KOE pastels from 1965, and Craig's Haywood's work on the other wall. The permanent collection pieces are also for sale, but they're not part of this show. We'll have the price list on this show. Those sales are 20% donation to the Zen Center for any savings makes. So if you're interested in a piece of art, you'll have the price list coming soon. We're also putting on a membership attendance drive. We always experience kind of a lull in the summer and start coming back in the fall. So if you have a place in your neighborhood, like your favorite coffee shop or whatever, that you'd like to hang one of these up, please take one. And they already have stickers on the back, so you can just stick them to the wall. And I think we had a couple of volunteers here to start putting these up in the local businesses around the zonal light. So we simply want to let people know we're here. We want to invite them. And the people who already know about us, they either come or go or not. So it's not so much a matter of going back to the same people. And although I do send out occasional reminders, but the idea here is to reach out to the neighborhood, reach out to local people as much as we can. Just let them know we're here and that they're invited. And when the program schedule is open for them. So the main things we want to emphasize are the newcomers on Wednesday night and the morning meditation for anybody who's already had some experience. Just a quick plug for the books. We've got a new shipment of the original Frontier in. You know anybody who's just starting out in Zen, interested in how to get started, this book is recommended for them. The Razor Blade of Zen is a little bit more Zen's place in society, in this culture that we find ourselves in. This will be kind of the core of the content for the Roshi's retreat at Watershed this coming week, for which Ian is preparing food. I have to start calling him by Udane. Is that not a name?
Kaho.
Kaho, and it means
Consequences.
consequences. Just consequences. No judgment. Kaho. Kaho sounds official. And I believe you prepared a lunch today?
No, not.
Okay, good. Anybody wants lunch, we can go out and get noodle bowls. Yes. I think Tycoon's kind of overpricing.
So it's
as all Christians have. So with that, tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your family, where you grew up, that early part.
Well, I was born in Atlanta. We lived in Canada Park at the time that I was born, and was born at Crawford Lawn Hospital. We moved around a lot when I was growing up. My father was a YMCA director, and in those days, for promotion, they wanted you to relocate. So I went to elementary school in Oklahoma City, and later in Richmond, Virginia. And then from Richmond, we moved to Gainesville, Florida, where I finished high school 1 year behind Tom Petty. We went to the same high school as he did, a year ahead of me. And then went to the University of Florida and got my degree in journalism, and then moved to North Carolina to engage in journalism practice.
It's almost like the military type upbringing.
Almost.
From base to base. It explains your lack of accent for you. So I had a similar name dropping exercise. Jim Brady was in my high school. He was a year ahead of me, and he and Johnny Branch, who was a friend of his, were both a year older than I, and we were all into Indian lore. Like I make a war bonnet from scratch, that kind of thing, but on the trip to climb. They danced in the parades with them, like a Halloween parade. And they did Native American Indian dances, which are quite kind of interesting, you know. And they had the full regalia, the full Indian outfits and so forth. So when rock and roll came along, and we started having dances, they got all the girls because they knew how to dance. Nobody else knew how to dance. So that's my close to fame story. So your degree was in journalism. How did you work in journalism? What were your first jobs?
Well, my first job was at the student newspaper, the Florida Alligator, and then I was hoping to get a job at the Charlotte Observer, which is a very good newspaper in North Carolina. I had spent time in North Carolina at summer camp, and I liked Charlotte. And so I moved to Charlotte, and I wasn't having much luck as a new journalist, but there was an ad in the paper for a reporter, photographer at a small paper further north in the foothills of the mountains, a little town called Elkin, North Carolina. It's in Andy Griffith country. Andy Griffith came from Mount Airy, which is just up the road from Elkin. And so I got the job there, and I was living in a town of about 5,000 people, working as a newspaper reporter for a paper that was published 3 times a week. And later became the editor. And of course, I was a photographer. You do a lot of everything there. And so that was, and I did some stringing for the Charlotte Observer. And
What's stringing?
oh, sorry, stringing is being kind of a ad hoc reporter for another paper.
So, John, just sound check. Can you hear us okay?
I could use just a little more volume. I'm understanding you, but I am leaning in a little bit.
Push that in. Just push it close to John. The whole thing. Yeah. You can say it.
Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Speak a little louder.
And I will make it a point to not speak only to Hoja.
Thank you.
Yes, so, tell us a little bit about your interest in journalism. We have had some others lately in the past year or two, people join online and coming who are also journalists. And there's a lot of press about journalism these days, and newspapers going under, and all of the politics of all that kind of, control of the media kind of concept, and in the age of social media. So Can you give us a gloss about that from your perspective as experience?
Well, I got started in journalism probably because of my political interests and being involved in the anti-war movement at the time. This was Vietnam War period, and it turned out I had a pretty good talent for writing, and so while I was in North Carolina, I won a number of press awards for investigative reporting and that sort of thing. But the the thing that kind of faded for me was the interest in writing the same, what I felt like was the same story over and over about calamities and misfortunes. You've heard the old saying, no news is good news, and good news is not news, bad news is news. So it was, I think it was kind of weighing on me. And I think that, of course, the days like that where it's a newspaper on paper are pretty much gone. And the rigorousness of being accurate and factual is also pretty much gone. So I don't feel too sanguine about the idea of journalism, even though I've been away from it for many years.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because AJC, just the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, just announced that this is their last year of printing. It'll be all online after this year. And, you know, we're saving some trees for us, I hope. Maybe some good will come of that. But, I'm a Luddite. I tend to watch the channels, news stations, and you have to say that news is no longer news, not in the sense that it used to be. It used to be informative information, something was actually happening, something was being reported. Now it just seems to be a rehash of, you know, I think what happened, the magazines had this problem one time. When you publish a magazine, you've got subscribers and you've got advertisers, and you've got so much content to fill. You've got to get that content to fill the magazine each time it comes out. So careful what you wish for, the actual success of the magazine starts to drive the whole business. You've got to get copy, you've got to get content. And I think that happened with newspapers or with online, especially mainline broadcast news. It's 24/7, and then you've got to fill that with content. So what do? You rehash everything that happens. You talk about everything that might happen, and you have panels and guests. It's kind of like an entertainment.
Yes, I agree. It's about clickbait and getting eyes on things, whether it's worth having eyes on them or not.
Remember the book 10 Megatrends? It was about 10 years ago. And the way they put that book together, they had a large staff of people who simply read newspapers, scanned them at least, and they would measure the actual column space devoted to certain subjects. And out of that, the ones that occupy the most space, if you think of a newspaper as a window, it's a limited window, there's only so much space. And so they measured the content and they came up with these 10 things that seemed to be reported on most. And those were the 10 megatrends of what was becoming important for the future. Who knows how that panned out. There's a similar trend in research in Buddhism where at one point the scholars were announcing that virtually all of the English translations of all of the texts from India, China, Japan, and so forth were now searchable. Because they've been digitized. And so now the scholars are spending a lot of time searching for keywords. So they could go in and find that an expression like shunyata, any type of expression, was repeated so many times, and apparently in this period in China, at least according to the transcriptions that we have from that period. So their reporting started becoming very mechanical. It's like how important was this and what were the trends, you know. which always struck me as, how does that get to the essence of what we're doing here in Zen? You know, how does that bring us back to the Krishna?
A little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yeah. So take us up to the first exposure you had to go to. I'm assuming it was not Candle Park, but that you were exposed to it some other way before that.
Yeah, actually, I can thank my karate sensei. When I was in college, I took a karate class, and the sensei, his name was No Dong, and he was from Vietnam, and he had a little library of martial arts books and Buddhist books, and I happened to pick one by Christmas Humphreys and started reading about Buddhism. And when I read it, it made perfect sense to me. It was not the least bit esoteric. It was factual and almost scientific in its approach. And so I started, I didn't keep up the karate, but I kept up the reading, and I read books by Alan Watts, like everybody does, and other people. And after I moved to North Carolina, I was pleased to find that the local library in this small town had several books of that sort, by Alan Watts and others. And so I continued reading, but I had no way of approaching practice per se. So it was not until I moved back to Atlanta in 1982 that I was in an environment where that was available. And I can't remember exactly how I heard about Atlanta Soto Zen Center, but I did. And I remember very vividly the first visit. I got there a little late, and when I came to the door, I heard gong being sounded, and I heard what was probably Hojo-san's voice saying, "Maka Hanya Ramita Shingyo Gong." And then the room began chanting, and my reaction to that was, I found where I need to be. And so that's pretty weird. It was very, very nice introduction.
It's interesting that Christmas Humphreys, that was Hans Holkers who puts in one of his collected talks. So let's jump over to music for a bit and tell us a little bit about how you came to become the saxophone.
I got exposed to music when I was very young. When I was in Oklahoma in elementary school, they had a string program in the schools, and I started learning violin and played for 2 or 3 years and enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed practicing, but when we moved to Virginia, they didn't have a string program in the schools, and my parents were not for private lessons, so that lapsed. And then I got started playing guitar, and there was a guy in the neighborhood who was willing to teach lessons, so I started learning how to play the guitar and playing kind of pop music and folk music and that sort of thing. And so I kept with the guitar for a number of years through my teenage and college years, and I got to where I was okay at it, but not great. I could play rhythm guitar in a band, but not lead. And later on, I got exposed to a folk flute and learned how to play that, and then got a real flute. And once I was in Atlanta, I got to talking to this guy who was a saxophone player, and said, "Yeah, I played flute. I wish I could learn the saxophone." He said, "Hell, man, if you know the fingers for flute, you already know the fingers for saxophone, because it's the same thing. It's just a transposed instrument." So I went ahead and picked up a cheap student saxophone and really loved it, and that's what got me started doing that.
What year was it? Sorry, what year was that?
That was probably about 86 or 87, something like that. I got started very late on saxophone.
My brother started on clarinet at the high school band. My dad was a pianist, jazz and he insisted really that the keyboard was the sort of basic thing. Learn to play the keyboard and translate that to virtual intervention. I found it very difficult to translate the keyboard to the guitar fretboard. Just like kind of weird geometry as they show. I've always wondered about how they got started and how Mike Coleman did a wonderful talk with brought in a bunch of guitars. It's talk on the history of the guitar. They're big sort of primitive guitar, through like play them and string how it came about. But it's always been weird to me that we're right-handed and yet we make the left hand do all of the hard work. Guitar.
Yeah, it's funny because even though I haven't played guitar regularly in many years, I still have the sense memory of the chord formations, and I can hear a piece of music, if it's, as long as it's not jazz or something like that, maybe Neil Young or Bob Dylan, and I can say, oh, that's a G, that's a C, and I can recognize, have a kind of ear memory for the guitar.
So how did you get into jazz as such?
My focus kind of gravitated there fairly early on in the process. I mean, that's kind of what saxophone is all about. And my teacher, who was played pop music, her name is Amy Lee, and she played the Neville Brothers at one time, and later she was for a number of years part of Jimmy Buffett's band. And she started me on etudes of Charlie Parker tunes and that sort of thing. Obviously not at Charlie Parker speed, but that's when I started learning jazz harmony and things that go beyond just the vanilla chords.
At that time, if I recall, the jazz scene here was pretty limited. There was Dante's Down the Hatch. There was Cy Thames was a jazz guitarist who played in a small venue, and I went and listened to him a couple of times. They would literally throw you out if you were too loud. You were there to hear the music, and they served drinks and food and everything. But that was very impressive to me. And my brother played a couple of times at the Dark Horse here on Highland when he was in town. And if I remember, it was pretty limited.
There was also Churchill Grounds next to the Fox, and of course that's gone now. But yeah, you're right. There was not a lot of jazz in town. It seems to me that it has kind of made a comeback here in Atlanta. There's Joe Granston, who is a jazz trumpet player, has a Monday night jazz jam at Napoleon's in Oak Grove, and Daniel and I went to that this past Monday. Neither of us played, but we enjoyed the music. And there's other venues around.
So when rock and roll came along, my dad and brother weren't exactly welcoming. They kind of took over all the club dates and everything gradually, not even gradually. I remember, I think my dad quoted Chet Atkins saying that rock and roll was a continuity of monotonous sound. Pretty cool. How did you feel about rock and roll? What was your interface with it?
Well, of course, I grew up on rock and roll. I vividly remember seeing the Ed Sullivan broadcast of the Beatles back in '64 or whenever it was, and that was an amazing event. And I was definitely into rock and roll of all sorts, as I grew up as a teenager, and didn't care anything for country or anything, but there were the college radio station did have a jazz program, and that's where I first heard Miles Davis' kind of blue album. So that kind of opened my ears, and I would not agree with the assessment Chet Atkins had for rock and roll, but of course everybody has their own sort of blinders. I remember that Louis Armstrong was asked about Charlie Parker's playing, and he said, "Oh, that's just Chinese music."
What do you mean by that?
He didn't think it made any sense.
Oh,
It was
okay.
like hearing Chinese gibberish.
I've heard, my brother told me they took Charlie Parker's recordings and they slowed them down and then they printed a notation of what he was playing. And it was all perfectly technically correct. And I read a story about him where he said his moment of liberation came when he realized that you cannot play a wrong note. Any note that you play in any intonation, any key signature, anything, has a connection back to the chord progression, however distant. And so once he realized that, whenever he would, quote, hit a wrong note, he would just bring it back into the fold by what he did next. And that was liberating for him.
Yeah, there's a stereotypical little catchphrase that you hear that there are no wrong notes in jazz, which is kind of like saying anything goes in Zen. And if you know the rules, then that's probably true. And the corollary to there are no wrong notes in jazz is as long as you resolve them.
Yeah.
And there's a great story by from Herbie Hancock when he was playing with Miles Davis in performance, and he hit a really bad clam, bad note, didn't fit.
Oh, the clam.
And
Is that jargon?
it's something people in jazz people use. Anyway, he was mortified, and Miles Davis, he said, kind of turned to him and gave his sideways glance and played a note on his trumpet that made Herbie Hancock's mistake right. And Herbie was so overwhelmed by, number one, Miles being able to pull that off and having the generosity to pull his feet out of the fire, that he was so stunned he couldn't play for a couple of measures. But any note can be resolved as long as you have your ears on. But
To stay on that a little bit more, I want to branch into the relationship of music to Zen, as you see it. There was a period where my brother would come to town, we'd go to jazz clubs. There was one on the south side where Miles Davis was playing. I went and saw him once. I can't remember the name of it now. There was a period where they were doing what we call cutting, where it was competitive and it was racial. It had racial overtones at least, and people would try to outplay each other. That meant, you do your solo, I step up and do mine. I try to cut you and do so much better than you that you were embarrassed of. Did you hear about that? Was that anything that you were aware of?
I've never been to a cutting session, but I know they exist. And the basic idea is you take the newbie and you get them up there and you say, okay, we're going to play Coco at 350 beats per minute. We're going to play Yardbird Suite, and we're going to do it in E flat, and just changing things and making it hard for the person. It's in its most benign sense. It's a test. In its less benign sense, it's an exclusionary thing to keep the. It's just like anything. I remember when I was a surfer in Florida, when you went to a place that wasn't your local surf place, the locals didn't like the Grimmies, which is what we were, the visitors, and they would surf over your board or something like that. So there's a lot of territoriality and everything.
You saw it come back in rap, where you had heavily rapping going. Okay, so let's turn back to Zen. What's this got to do with Zen? How would you talk about the relationship of, let's start with music and Zen for you. Where do you see the connections or the resonance there, if at all?
I think that the commonality with music and Zen is ideally non-attachment. I think that as a musician, and Daniel and others here can chime in if they agree or disagree. I think the ideal scenario when you're playing music is that you're not thinking, you're not trying to come up with a brilliant idea for the next chord. You're just letting it flow. And in the same sense of Zen practice, you're not trying to focus on a particular mantra or idea or train of thought. You're observing your awareness and not grasping onto it.
I certainly found that my limited amount of playing in groups is that, on the one hand, you could let go because you didn't have to keep the tempo. Everybody's keeping the tempo. You didn't have to carry the thing. It's like a wonderful conversation. But as soon as you started thinking about it, you want to do something else.
So yes,
Very fun. So let's, how are we doing on time?
We're 11:19.
Okay. So I think let's take a little break and open up for questions, comments. I'm going to grab the clock so that the time. I've got my watch if you. That helps. I got you written numbers wearing it. So anyone, please.
I've thought about music in a similar way, also being a musician. I guess for me, I guess kind of I thought about it kind of a lot, this connection. Like I kind of feel like performing or listening to music and Zen, it's almost kind of like trying to not achieve the same goal, but kind of coming to the same mind state in a way where there's kind of a dropping off of, subject and object. There's not, there's not like, a performer or a person, if you're the one performing the music, there's not a person performing it and then kind of like the separation between you and the music, I guess. Like it just becomes like, you kind of cease to exist. There's just music being played and it just kind of comes from like if it's something that you know well, like if you have something memorized. I guess in my case, I'm more used to reading music or something that's been composed by someone else rather than improvisation. But, if it's something that you're so intimately connected with, that it's kind of ingrained in your brain well enough, like that it sort of flows out of you and kind of subconscious way. And like you were saying, the second you actually start to think about, am I, what comes next, or even if like, I don't know, there's any kind of distraction whatsoever, like it's so easy to like lose your train of thought or slip up basically. So yeah, that's there's probably more to say about that than I'm thinking about.
yeah. Another thing to me that is in common between Zen practice and music is the rules of the game, the rules of the road. There's a lot of it seems like a conflict, but everybody thinks of music as this kind of fun thing that anybody can do, but they don't think about what all the work that you have to do to be able to do that. You have to learn your scales. You have to understand what a 2-5-1 progression is, and you have to work at it to be able to get free. I think it was Charlie Parker who said, learn all the rules and then forget them. And the same thing in Zen practice, people, when they first see Zen or think of Zen, they think of it as an anything goes kind of thing. And it's not. It's observing particular protocols. You bow to other people, you sit in a certain way, you chant sutras, you try to disengage your attachment to trains of thought, and you've got to be rigorous in the rules before you can let go and just have anything to go.
I think it's helpful to make a division between personal and social, where you can say, why do we do it this way? You know, the young guy coming, he'd been practicing at Tony Packer. And he said, why do you walk that way and hold your hands that way? Tony doesn't do it, actually, this and that. He had a book that of hers, and I said, well, let me read the book. I said, oh, you really want to read it? So the main argument she's making in the whole book is not to fall into comparative thinking. So they're kind of thinking, you're doing this the wrong way, guys. So, but I think the rules of engagement are mostly social level, but then you have to take that onto the cushion as well. So what do I usually do? I usually think about what I'm thinking about. I usually think about what I'm experiencing. I try to make it make sense. I analyze it, etc. Right? So Zen is asking me to recognize what you ordinarily do and see if you can do something else or stop doing that anyway. See what happens if you stop doing that, what you usually do. I think it's the same point you're making in music. Barbara Cohn said, better that you learn all these protocols. I had some resistance to going through that kind of training in Austin. It's better that you know these and not do them than not know them, not do them. Okay. If you at least know them and not, you know what you're not doing.
Yeah, I agree.
So John, do you have anything on board on your side?
Thank you, Hojo. Joseph, Abby, do you have any comments, questions, thoughts that you'd like to share? Hojo, I'll step forward with one. Thank you. First of all, is it Taizan? Am I saying that correctly?
Taizan. A's are usually flat. Taizan.
Taizan. Okay. Taizan, thank you for putting yourself in the spotlight this morning and sharing a little bit about your life, your experiences. I found myself wondering what your take is on the impact of AI on journalism and writing. To give you an indication of where I'm at, when I Google a question now, it almost seems automatic that AI says to me, I've pulled up 25 sources, 8 of them in summary say this, 6 say this, and 4 or 5 are sort of unclassified. And I think, okay, thank you for pulling those up and reviewing all of those. Taizan, what are your thoughts on AI and how it's going to impact journalism?
I have not thought about that. I don't put a lot of focus on journalism anymore, and I don't trust most of what I read, whether I know it's AI or by another human being, unless I verify it. This is not necessarily in the realm of journalism, but my girlfriend is always sending me these Instagram videos of somebody saying, you got to do this and you got to stop using this or you're going to die. And So my immediate reaction to those, well, usually my immediate reaction is just discard them and ignore them. But if I have any interest at all, I'll go out there and do a search and look at what somebody from CDC or a reliable source has to say on the subject of these so-called toxins. And that's what I will believe over something on Instagram or YouTube.
In the case of toxins, very clear, if you take too much vitamin A, which has been happening, it becomes toxic. Too much of anything is toxic. If you drink too much water, you will drown. My brother-in-law was schizophrenic, and amongst other things, he had an imbalance where he would actually get drunk on water. The ionization of the water did something where he would become intoxicated by drinking water. So these are not easy black and white issues.
I'm watching all the sodium out of my system, drinking too much water, and that makes your brain be malfunction. So they had to carry me off being crazy from water.
I read something recently that I started trying, which I used to do a long time ago. They recommend brushing your teeth with baking soda. Leaving baking soda in your water, drinking baking soda to keep your, I guess, electrolytes up in your system. Seems to help. Gerald, we're going to die anyway, right? Actually, one of my upcoming podcasts is "You Don't Die," which is what Maslow first told Bill Cooper. So there's an anomaly in the Buddhist teaching that your body is born and your body dies. That doesn't mean that you die. And that doesn't mean that you are a soul or have a soul, or you're a self-existent entity. It just means that whatever this is that is observing doesn't die.
I think we die every minute. I'm not the same person that was sitting over there in the Golan chair a while ago.
There's no chair there, by the way.
See,
So tell us a little, I meant before John made his comment about journalism and AI, and you made your response, it's kind of out of it. I did want to ask you what, if any, connection do you see between, let me say, the propagation of Zen and journalism? The good news.
I don't see a direct connection between the two. At least not in terms of conventional mainstream journalism. If you consider periodicals, like Buddhist periodicals like Tricycle or something like that, I guess that could be called journalism. But in terms of conventional mainstream journalism, journalists don't have time to do all the delving into things that will give them an accurate perspective. I remember when I was at the monastery reading through a clipbook of articles about Tassajara and seeing, mistaken references to what people were doing or what their roles were. And I just kind of wrote that off as journalists, taking shortcuts. So I don't see that journalism has a significant place in terms of propagation of Zen.
Well, I would comment that what we do see in journalism, and all public media, for that matter, whether you think of it as journalism or not, is a kind of reinforcement of cultural meanings. And what Buddhism is bringing is not necessarily the good news in terms of the gospel and so forth, but it's a different take on reality. And basically, the proposition, I think, is that, first of all, on a personal level, all of us are capable of having the same kind of insight that Buddha had. It just takes a lot of work. Just like you were saying about music, it takes a lot of work. You have to work the method. Zazen does not work itself. You have to work the method. The hope or the promise is that if you persist and you sit still enough, straight enough for long enough, you're going to go through the same process that Buddha went through. And ultimately probably come to the same conclusions, recommendations, and findings and so forth that he did. The implications are different now, but their culture is so different. Or many of them are. So I would say if I were to fault journalism, it would be for reinforcing and playing along with the existing cultural memes that are certainly not those of Buddhism. Like the question I have is, how can there be anything fundamentally wrong with reality? And who are you to say that, right? So the mission of Zen is to help people overcome their own ignorance. We don't save anybody in the usual sense of Buddha couldn't save anybody, right? Buddha himself could not save anybody. He could only save himself from his own ignorance. But the method by which he went about that, you can teach. Just as in music, you can teach somebody how to play the keyboard, how to play the horn. You can't teach them music. We can't teach anybody Zen. We can only teach them the method. And through that method, they can hopefully transcend their own ignorance. So the only thing that is wrong in the world, from, I would think, a journalistic perspective as well as a Buddhist perspective, is human beings, the ignorance and the bad calls and the bad judgment and defensiveness, selfishness, etc. That was the syndrome that Buddha pointed out from the beginning. That hasn't changed. So I would think a mission of journalism around Buddhism would be to get that point across. And it's not being made.
I don't think it exists anymore either. How could it ever come to exist again?
What did it is?
Belief in information that we don't already have.
Tell us more about that.
Well, there used to be a general understanding that there was some knowledge we were going to find out from the news or find out from other people. That there was things to learn, and I think that's just gone. People don't understand the difference between information they already have and what somebody's speaking to them. People don't understand. They clearly don't recognize when they're just gratified by hearing what they want to hear or what their tribe wants to hear. There's no such thing as news. There's no such thing as journalism, information. Rock and roll used to feel important. Even people who are into it. Even people who are into it now, like my daughter, they have no concept of how you'd be at a big concert and feel like, this is changing things, something's happening here. All of the stuff is just gone. We're clearly at the beginning of dark ages, have been for a while. There's, to the extent that the average person knows anything, not for much longer. The average person is going to know nothing at all and just be a cog in a machine doing whatever job they're told to do.
Buddhism has always taken this view that this is the period of decline.
It's none of that stuff that we all thought was okay. None of that's coming back. How could it? It's not.
You're the interviewer. So
Yeah,
I wanted to ask about you, but
you can ask about me. I'd rather you'd ask about me than about journalism because I'm not a journalist anymore, and I'll leave journalism to the journalists if there are any. So ask away.
How long did you ever practice before results like attain samadhi?
I'm not sure that I've ever had that sort of experience. I guess the closest I can come to it was one time when I came out of a building and walking down the street, and there was a certain formation in the sky that just washed over me like, I don't know what, and for like a microsecond, I felt like I understood everything, and then it was gone. And I don't know if that was Kensho or just, a blip on the neurons or what, but And there was another time when we were at Canada Park when I was in a sitting period, and I had really pretty much disengaged from normal thought processes and was not even time aware. And it was a long sitting period. I think it was probably about 45 minutes, but it was towards the end of the morning. And in those days, we had newcomers come after the morning sit. And so I was sitting there facing the wall, and someone who came from newcomers apparently knocked on the door, which, they didn't need to knock, they could just walk in, but I heard this knock, knock, knock. And at first, it didn't even register as a knock on the door. It was just a sensory input, and it startled me. And then something in me felt like laughing. But I don't know why, but I had this urge to just laugh, and I can't be laughing while people are sitting. I don't want to interrupt sitting. And so I was trying to suppress my laughter, and the more I did, the more the urge came up. I finally just let go and said, all right, I'll just laugh and get it over with. And as soon as I had that impulse, the laugh urge disappeared. And again, I don't know if that really answers your question, but I have certainly not sat zazen with the idea of experiencing any kind of an awakening moment. I'm trying to let go of things of that sort.
That's typically samadhi and satori, or samadhi and awakening are separated. You're torn in samadhi. Samadhi is where you actually are right now. Everything is in balance. Everything is centered. It's our imagination, our construction, the construction of the mind that distracts us and makes us confused into our confusion. So your meditation is not going to reveal anything that isn't already true. It's just that mindfulness is mainly remembering the truth, remembering what's important. So the Noble Truths that there's no existence, usually expressed as without suffering. Suffering is a very poor term. There's no existence without change. This existence requires change. Nothing is permanent. Nothing can be permanent, and so forth. And so we don't. If and when we wake up, if we have a samadhi experience, it's considered preliminary. That's your platform. Necessary, the shamatha, stillness, stilling your mind, is samadhi. Samadhi coming into centered balance. Sometimes called the mirror of Zen, where it's reflecting everything without distortion, good, bad, the other. And then it said the satori is like smashing the mirror to a billion pieces. This is like a Renzai expression. So the literature indicates that something profound is going to happen, something big is going to happen. So we sit and it doesn't happen. Don't get discouraged. But Matsuoka Roshi said, don't look for a lightning bolt out of the sky. He said it's more like clouds parting to reveal the sun, like a natural process. If you think about it, you're already in samadhi. You sit in physical samadhi, physical balance. From that comes emotional samadhi, less anxiety, more calm over time, not necessarily immediately. Mental samadhi, less confusion, more clarity, at least about what the teachings of Buddhism are pointing at. And finally, social samadhi, more harmony, less friction in relationships comes about because you're becoming more comfortable in your own skin. But if you try to anticipate something happening in the future, this is the same as in music, and since it says like trying to adorn yourself with jewels, you're trying to live in the future. And so it necessarily distracts from what is happening in the present. And if you ever wake up, it's going to be in present, so-called present moment. So you can correlate these four spheres, the personal, with the Four Noble Truths. If you think about it, if you do have an insight experience, it has to be in your personal sphere. It doesn't make sense to put it in the social or the natural or the universal sphere. it's going to happen on a very personal, intimate level. If you think about the path, the Eightfold Path, Fourth Noble Truth, that's definitely the social sphere, right? That's the way we practice every day in the primarily the social sphere. If you think about the natural sphere, that is the source of suffering. It's biological. The source of our ignorance and so forth comes from the fact that we're incarnated as a biological being. That's where that's in that sphere. And if you think about the universality of the cessation was in the personal, but if you think about the origins in the biological, if you think about the path to the social, if you think what's the actual existence, that there is no such existence without this so-called suffering or change. That's in the universal realm. That is true everywhere, every when, anytime, any place. These Four Noble Truths are true. And that's all on the intellectual plane. The only important thing in Zen is that on the personal level, you persist. You don't give up. And have some faith in the original mind. You will have the same kind of experience that Buddha had. And if not, you're getting in your own way.
I think,
I'd like to blame you.
Sure.
Man.
for me, what's important now, and was probably not something I even thought about when I started, every moment Zen, every moment in practice. And Zen practice, obviously, we all know is not just sitting on the cushion. It's, washing the dishes or sweeping the floor or sewing. And living in the monastery was an immersion experience where that really came home to me, where, the work practice, doing work as practice was, it was similar to, as a musician, when I've been to music camps for like a week, and you get up first thing in the morning, you start classes, and everything is just oriented toward music all through the day and into the night, and then you do it all over the next day, and that kind of immersion experience is terrifically valuable. And I've tried to maintain that sort of thing. It's a lot easier in a monastery where you have no choice to, distract yourself with TV or Facebook or anything like that. And I've tried to bring that back to what I'm doing now, so that I'm trying to keep an awareness moment to moment. If I'm driving my car, or I'm putting a reed on my mouthpiece, or sewing practice, or whatever, that's kind of my focus, rather than some sort of big thing to happen.
I'd like to talk about your current and recent kind of rebooting of your engagement in Zen and pursuing the formal path and all that. And something else on. Oh, every minute Zen, every moment Zen. This morning I was in the hallways trying to be very, very quiet. Everybody's sitting and doing things I had to do. And I opened the door, go into the conference room, and I scrape it across my toes. Oh, that's not every minute Zen. So I do like every other minute. So tell us a little bit more about your more recent return to more formalized practice.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because when I started with this center back in the 80s, I kept it up pretty rigorously for a number of years. maybe through the 80s into the 90s. And then, I can't remember what made me lapse. Maybe it was work or, you always come up with some sort of an excuse.
What did Master Lenin say? Life is what happens when you plan cuts your
Right, right. And so I dropped out for a while, and then I came back for a while, and then I dropped out again. And I've done that a number of times. It's kind of like quitting smoking, so sort of thing. You think, oh well, I can have a cigarette now and then, but no, you can't. And I just decided that I wanted to come back as part of this sangha in an active way and find a way to make that my practice. And going to the monastery was kind of part and parcel of that reboot, as you say. And so I'm endeavoring to maintain my practice here, my practice at home, and my practice, every moment Zen kind of thing. And I feel bad about letting you down from dropping out of music. But I appreciate and I'm very grateful for being welcomed back.
So tell us how you were there when? A couple months ago?
I was there for the month of May.
So tell us a little bit about that, and how would you, just for the sake of people, nobody's been to Taizan, how would you compare and contrast practice here with what you saw there?
Well, there's a lot more that's the same than is different, is what I would say, except for the immersion part. The day at Tassajara starts with wake up bell at 5:30, zazen from 6 to 7, morning service from 7 to 7:20, something like that. Then a short soji period and breakfast. Soji is cleaning, taking care of the, different little things. And then after breakfast, there's work practice. And work practice goes on until lunch. Then after lunch, there's another work practice period. Then you have free time to go to the baths. And there's evening service, which is much shorter. And then there's dinner. And then finally, there's another period of zazen from 8 to 9, and then bedtime. And it's the same every day. It's like I said about music camp. You get up in the morning and you go to theory class, and then combo class, and then something else. And you don't have to think about what am I going to do today. You're going to do the same thing you did yesterday. And it was a really terrific experience to be there and to be among people who take the practice seriously like we do here. And it's, as I said, because you're in, Tassajara is off the grid. It's kind of a world unto itself. There's no phone service, cell phone service, no availability of internet, that sort of thing. You don't have the opportunity to listen to music. It's all about Zen practice and the mutual respect that you have for your Sangha members. And those things are not so different here. They really aren't. It just doesn't go on all day, that's all. When I come on Sundays, I make it a point to get here. I'm probably not getting here early enough, but I always want to participate in some of the soji that has before sitting practice. And I've kind of taken it upon myself to come on Wednesdays and do cheating, which is altar cleaning and that sort of thing. And the sewing practice that I've gotten into here with Corolla Sensei has been really a great practice. It's very mindful. You know, you don't really have a lot of choice in whether you're thinking about something else when you do each individual stitch and chanting the Namo Kyo Butsu with every stitch.
Otherwise you stick yourself in the finger.
Yeah, that's part of the practice. Yeah. So I would not, as you say, I don't like comparative analyses. So I would say that the practice here is really the same on all the important levels from the monastery.
I think household practice is the future. And, I think of the guerrilla warfare, we're hitting on, like go back out into the culture, into society. Thank you for that report. Does anybody have any questions about that? Online, John, Abby, Joseph? It's similar to, the difference is similar to what happens at Watershed. But when you go to Watershed, we're in a primitive cabin up there. In the house is very modern, and you can get online and do, we've even told in my retreats, it's perfectly acceptable. If the reason you can't go to the retreat is that you have to do some remote work on your laptop or whatever, it's fine from my perspective, take an hour or two or whatever a day, and you do that at the house and attend the rest of the retreat. But our approach has been an open door policy. We never close the Zendo doors. For our members, many of our members have keys and they're welcome to come here at any time. So we're trying to bring Zen practice into the 21st century, where we're not all going to be monastics. We cannot afford to go, live some other place like that. We have to maintain households, we have to maintain our careers, and a little bit of Zen is better than none. So if a person can come to retreat at Watershed, and they have to bring their laptop along, and they're going to spend some time doing remote work to keep their income coming in, I think that's perfectly acceptable. Brian and I are talking about creating an internet cafe on the porch there, the main house. So anybody else to work can go sit in that part of the porch on a table and do the work. Because yeah, and I think we misinterpret. We have a lot of mythology and romantic ideas about what monasteries were actually like in the old days, and even what they're like now. You'd be surprised at how fenestrated they are. Fenestration is like windows, people coming and going. It doesn't fit our mythology. So if there's a future for Zen in America or for the world, it's in household practice. Zen is for everyone. So we're doing our best to accommodate. Several people have told us they think we've struck one of the best balances they've seen between the formal side and the informal side here. All of this, as Dogen said, when first you meet a master, without engaging in incense offering, bowing, chanting Buddha's name, repentance, reading scripture, you should just wholeheartedly sit and thus drop away body and mind. And even for a moment, you express the Buddha's seal in its reactions by sitting upright in samadhi. The entire sky becomes the entire phenomenal world. The whole phenomenal world becomes the Buddha's seal, and the entire sky turns into light. So all of this follow is about butts on cushions. This is the social manifestation of the practice. So the temple here is like your posture. The building is like your posture. This is a place conducive to practice. It's as simple as that.
I was glad to hear your quote there, Doug, and I had just read Vendela. Um, I may be pronouncing that wrong from
That's right.
from Shobogenzo. I remember him saying those words.
He was 25 or something, very effusive language. So we've got a few minutes left. Let's just go around to a few more Q&A. John, you got anybody on board there who wants to ask or say something?
Anybody online? Comment, question? I believe we're good, Hojo.
Thank you, teacher. I was just gonna say, you made the analogy to the music camp. I mean, that obviously relates to me. It's like, I guess being in music school generally, that was like, 7 years of my life. So I kind of, it makes the idea of doing something like that more appealing because, obviously we will always like have our normal everyday lives, but when you can have that opportunity to like, put aside everything, like I guess like if you're going to college, that's different. That's like, that is your entire life at that point instead of trying to purposely make that a side thing. But yeah, that's what I was gonna say. But yeah, no, it's inspiring.
Yeah, it's not something that you can do all the time, or at least most people can't. But the immersion is terrific. But you can bring that back. Like I remember when I was taking lessons with Amy, she gave me an exercise called long tones, and I won't go into the details of that, but it's tedious and not fun, kind of like working on scales. So I would do long tones, for about 20 seconds, and then I'd go to my practice piece, and then at the next lesson, I would start playing my practice piece, and he would say, haven't been working on those long tones, have you?
Yeah.
And so then I started actually getting serious about the long tones, and I was just flabbergasted at what a great result it gave me. And
Because it's essentially just holding a tone for long.
yeah, it's basically blowing one single tone and starting soft and crescendoing and getting louder and then getting softer and holding it that way.
Singing exercises are like that too.
Yeah, yeah.
Straight ahead and strive for tone.
With other instruments as well.
Yeah, my first exposure to meditation with Matsoko Roshi, I recognize it as an immersion process. The Bauhaus method is that too, that you're immersed. The whole first year is all foundation, just immersion in materials and learning how clay works, learning how cement works, learning how glass works, everything, to no particular purpose. You're not building a birdhouse or anything, but you absorb the way materials perform through sensory immersion. So you know how wood behaves. You can build something out of wood, glass or whatever. And I recognize meditation right away as another immersion process. But the medium in which we're immersing ourselves is consciousness itself. What we're studying as a medium is mind, is consciousness. So that was a very quick connection from Bauhaus to Zen for me, and it was very helpful. Plus the design approach to problem definition, problem solving. So how to think of Zen practice as problem solving process. You may not have a good definition of the problem. Defining the problem is more important than the solution. You thoroughly define the problem. This is also true of group process and design. Everybody tries to define the problem first. The theory is the solution is inherent in the definition. So instead of trying to leap to a solution, which we all do, we're impatient, right? We want to get enlightened. We need to take a backward step, define freaking problem. That's what Buddha did.
I think our biggest problem is recognizing that you don't have a fundamental problem. You have
There can't be
nature,
anything which is fundamentally wrong. we're getting it wrong. Yeah. As usual. At least we always know what we're doing. Okay, thank you very much. Let's close with the four vows. Anything from you, John? Anything further?
Oh, Joe, I don't have anything at the moment. You had mentioned the watershed retreat already, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think maybe one seat left, but I'm not sure. Andrew is coming from Birmingham and he may be bringing PJ with him, so that would be the last seat. But in my retreats, we can always have a couple of extra people. That doesn't affect the retreat. Ryan is more strict about his. So beings are numberless, I vow to freedom. Illusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to freedom. Illusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. The delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it.